Good afternoon, religious students and graduate students of UFTL. Coming to you this afternoon. I hope you all are doing well. Last week, no, we didn't have a chance to go over the video because of midterms and papers. But I just wanted to go over some stuff for today as you continue your studies. As I posted in the bulletin yesterday, we have about 3 weeks left for this course. So that means that you have a couple things that need to be done in order to complete the course. Uh, First of all, I want to go over your paper. Some of you have turned in the first paper. And I'm just going to review exactly what is the paper assignments that you have to do because you have 3 paper assignments for the course. Now, I didn't put a big research paper, but I just had a paper where you could just basically it's a paper where you could just write 3 small papers for the course. Okay. What I have here is, if you see here, there are 3 papers for the course. So paper 1, basically, students provide a 5 to 8 page research paper on the history of African American church. That covers everything that we've kind of spoke about in the first 3 chapters. So the paper we shall cover the key movements of the African church, people involved in discrimination issues. Okay? And so far, some of you have started, you've turned in those papers in. I see 1 or 2 students turning in paper 1. Paper 2, same format, but you'll be writing a research paper on different African American church denominations. As we've been talking about the Methodist, the Baptist, the Pentecostal, basically you're going to write a paper about each denomination and how did they impact the African American movement in the churches. Okay, so basically this paper is going deeper into your research and then reading your textbook to see how each church was different. Okay, as some of you stated in your discussions, the Baptist church was different from the Methodist because the Baptist church wanted more freedom compared to the Methodist church that was under a bishop, okay, and so forth. So you're going to go deeper. Your second paper is going to be between 3 to 5 pages. So I'm kind of getting down a little, 3 to 5 pages, just to help alleviate some stress. So it's going to be 3 to 5 pages. Same thing with paper number 3, 3 to 5 pages. Okay. Uh, then the third paper is going to be students will write a research paper on leadership of African American church in the past and present, basically on the leadership. And you might pick 2 to 3 leaders of the African American church, from the Methodist, from the Baptist, from the Pentecostal, from the cults, the church of the cults, and basically write about them. We get 3 to 5 pages to kind of demonstrate exactly how these people impacted, and made a difference in the African American church movement since the 1800s and beyond. Okay. The writing format had changed due to university policies, and instead of using cake turbine, every student, whether religious or business course, are using APA format to further notice. So paper 2 and 3, your PowerPoint, you can just use APA since you're familiar with it. I see some people are happy about that. And the following thing, your very last thing, is a PowerPoint. Your PowerPoint is a summary of the 3 papers. It's not something new, but the research that you've done in paper 1, 2, and 3 will be summarized in that paper. Okay. I just give you an option if you want to take papers 2 and 3 and just make 1 paper from it, where you talk about the African American nations and leadership, into 1 paper because time is crucial for us. We have 3 weeks left. You're free to do that. Again, I could say this again. You could take paper 2 and 3 and formulate into 1 paper, okay, that talks about the different African American church denominations and the leadership. It could just be 1 paper because, as again, I say, I know with the hurricane pushing us back, and I'm following how some of you are turning in assignments, so you can just do 1 paper, okay, for that. I know paper 2 is due this week, but looking at how some of you have not turned in paper 1 yet, so I'm going to push the paper due date to week 3. week 7 for papers 2 and 3. You can put it together as one. Okay, I did this again because of some of the students who are backed up when it comes to their courses, so I'm helping you out. Okay. But definitely this is graduate work, and you definitely have to complete the research papers to pass the course. I'll tell you that. And you still have discussions that you have to post. And I believe we have a quiz or 2 coming up. This week you don't have a quiz because I gave you a paper assignment. So you really need to push on this. As you see here, we're on week 5. We're reading chapter 7. Next week is week 6. And week 7 is coming up. And then week 8 is your PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so time is very critical. You really need to push to really get the papers in. And I know you probably have more than one course. Okay. Well, for now, I just want to go over a little bit of our lessons. Last week, which was week 4, we were looking into chapters 5 and 6. And on the PowerPoint that I have for that week, basically, chapter 5 talked about, if I could just turn the page here. Chapter 5 talks about the church growth in African American religious movements, and that the implication of the church growth in African American religious movements. Basically, the PowerPoint, this really deals with the end of slavery in America. Okay, President Abraham Lincoln became president, and they wanted to change the laws, the status for African Americans, and to change the life of both Africans and Cajun white Americans. Because keep in mind, a lot of the Cajun whites were slaveholders, and they relied on the African American to help them with their care for their properties and whatever products or businesses. So now, once they shifted and they removed slavery, it caused a big tension for the Cajun people, because now they had to find labor. They had to be able to find ways to keep their activities going. Just like when we have a protest where companies, unions go out there and they protest their companies for low wages, and it causes the companies to have to find replacements. Same thing happened. The immunity, according to the Webster Dictionary, is an act of setting someone free from control of slavery. Immunity basically means they set them free. They removed them from slavery. They removed them from slave masters. They took away every bondage that was holding the African American. Although we know all this happened in the late 1800s, but while they took away slavery, Black people still had other problems in America. And that's why you see the rights of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and so forth, because now they came up with new issues, bondage for African Americans. Well, basically, the benefits for the Declaration, what did it do when Abraham Lincoln declared this with his government? It gave slaves the freedom to leave masters and plantations. It gave them the ability to walk out, leave. They were not stuck to live on the plantation. But as you read the book and you've studied African American history and literature, you see that many slaves, some left and some stayed, because slaves were not prepared for the freedom that was offered to them. Mentally, physically, socially, they were not ready to go out. They had no land, they had no jobs. They counted on their slave masters to provide housing for them. So now basically they were physically, economically, socially ready for this. And the biggest issue with the African Americans back then was they were ill-educated. There was a lack of education among many of them. And because of the lack of education, some of them were so fearful they stayed on the plantation with the previous slave masters. The Cajun whites also were against the freedom. Why? As I said, white Americans lost economically without slaves to run their plantations. Basically, they took away their means because they had cheap labor. They didn't have to pay labor. They didn't have to pay minimum wage. Everybody had to work because they were owned by the slaves. Now, labor laws came in, and now they have to pay the people who are working for them and many other things. Because of that, they tried to stop their freedom. So when slavery ended, new organizations came upon to stop African Americans from leaving or to hinder them from claiming their freedom. That's why I get the Ku Klux Klan, which was an organization, as you know, men wearing white hoods, white robes, and they were burning African Americans back in the day, hanging them on ropes. Okay, there was the Knights of the White Communities, which was the other one. Okay, and basically African American lynching grew after the freedom. There was lynching, there was cruelty, there was beatings that were taking place. So freedom was good, but there was consequences of the African American gaining freedom. Because of that, we saw churches. Churches were needed, just like churches today help the poor, help the needy, help the widow, where churches were one of the vehicles to help African Americans back in the day. Okay, and many in our history books doesn't talk too much about that, but that's why we're studying the African American church. We see the Northern Philadelphia leaders assisted. That means the churches, the people from the North, if you see on this map, you see the red states, they were more influential in helping those in the South. Okay, that's why freedom occurred first in the North than it did in the South. Okay, African Americans had more freedom in states like New York, Boston, and all those other places, though, compared to the deep South as of Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, all those states that really took more time to adapt to this. Okay, African American Freedom Bureau came about to assist the African Americans, and basically a lot of Cajun white churches from the North provided assistance to those in the South. So you can see how there was a difference in America between the North and the South, okay, coming from the North and the South. That's why we come into civil wars. Basically, the church movement grew during the freedom. In other words, the African American church, their purpose, their significance, the reason why they existed was to help abolish slavery and to help the African American receive total freedom to live as a normal citizen. You see two different pictures here. The church in the early 1800s and so forth, 1960s, African Americans were rushing into these churches because that's where they found hope. They found answers. Here we see a second picture of current African Americans, many past and present leaders who helped, with slavery issues, especially in the 1960s. You see many people in this picture who had something to do. African American Baptists. African Americans continued to grow in the United States after their freedom. And the more freedom there occurred, the more growth was growing in the church and with the African American communities. You see in the 1840s, 1850s, and 1900s, you see a big spurt of growth coming in the communities, as the textbook says. Now, when it comes to the Baptist churches grew. Okay, that was one of the means for the African American Baptists to grow back then. Basically, their strategy was to have a spiritually filled preachers preach revivals. In the past, many churches had revivals. Revivals was the norm, and most of our African American churches, even in Caribbean countries, even in my church today, having a revival is a way of bringing the people together. You could call it discipleship. We've used different means for discipleship in some of your churches, but some of the existing churches still use revivals. Probably have 3-4 revivals a year in order to bring people together. Now, although their strategy was to have spirit-filled preachers preach revivals, some of these preachers were ill-educated. That means they didn't receive the type of education we see today in our modern-day preachers, where they have an undergraduate degree, master's, and even doctorate degrees like most of our churches. They gave preachers and members a feeling of value as human beings. So African Americans felt like slaves working, but when they went into the church, they felt like they were somebody. That's why they would dress up. That's why they had the church attire. That's the place where they felt like they were known, and so forth. Okay. The Black Baptist populations. There are many different Black Baptist churches that grew. We see the Colored Primitive Baptists in America. We see the National Baptists, which had the largest population according to the 1906 census. We see Free Will Baptist Church of Missouri. So there were many different type of Baptist churches coming, and each, as you said in your discussions, and if we read in the book, each of them formed because of conflicts with the previous association of church. Okay. Now, we're in the Methodist Church, we see growth as well. Okay. The African Methodist Pentecostal Zion Church and African Methodist and Pentecostal Church were the two largest Methodist movements. So they grew from the exodus of African Americans from biracial churches. Overall, all these churches were growing because in the past, African Americans were part of the white Cajun church. But because they wanted to break away from them, then you started to see the Black Baptist, Methodist, Pentecostal churches coming up, through those movements. Another thing that I think is interesting to know is that there was a rise of sects and cults, okay? Different type of churches that emerged during those movements. And as your book says in chapter 5, there was a cult leader named the Father Divine. Basically, he preached the holiness movement. He led a congregation to view his divinity, and he taught personal morality and ethical sides of religion. So this was a cult leader, just like we have cult leaders emerging today. If you ever drive around Broward County, you see a group of men at night wearing purple shirts. They claim to be the nation of Israel. That's the cult movement, and the book talks about that guy. There was another one named Bishop Charles Emmanuel Grace, or Sweet Daddy Grace. He formed the House of Prayer for Our People in 1924, and they focus on healing miracles in the services. And they still have churches that exist if you Google that. Okay. There we see the Nation of Yahweh, which I talked about in Miami. It was founded by Yahweh bin Yahweh in Miami, Florida, and it focused on Black spirituality and leaders in the Bible. So we see in chapter 5, how the cause and effects of moving from slavery into freedom. Okay, it was good that the people had freedom, but then organizations came out to stop them from gaining equal rights. That's why in 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, there was fighting for equal rights for African Americans, for voting, for education, to being able to go in public places with other people. Okay, those were the consequences of them receiving freedom from slavery. Then you move on to chapters 6 to 7, and I have the notes up for chapter 7 up. Basically, talks about denominations, okay, and mission work. How African Americans got involved in mission work. In the Caribbean, in Africa, Haiti, Liberia, all these other countries. They started doing mission work. So there was a lot of movements going on in the African American church. They prospered in many ways, but there was a lot of conflict in many ways. And one of you said something in your discussion. It was funny how these churches had to go to court and have lawsuits to fix their problems. And those issues that you see that happen in the past are kind of a foundation for why you see certain churches are moving, drifting, dying, for succeeding in our times today. As you know, the Methodists, the Baptists, all those type of churches, there's a decline in church membership in these type of churches, but there's an increase in non-denominational church. So those are the effects of this, denominations, African Americans, and their freedom that they receive. So I hope you really enjoyed this class and really studying from the book to get a picture of our history as African Americans, even though many of us come from different Caribbean nations, but our birth nation is from Africa. So let's keep studying, focus on your papers, as I said, to help you out, your last two papers will be combined as one to help everybody. One is on the denomination and leadership, just make it one paper. And do your best to get all the coursework in. You have a PowerPoint due the last week of the class, okay? And that will be your final assignment. You have discussion due this week. Start working on your paper, turning any missing assignments that you have, discussions, quizzes. Paper one is due. It's still one paper. You have to turn in paper one. And if you have not contacted me about any missing work, please do that. Please don't just leave, don't turn in the work, because I will put in grades, if I haven't heard from you, because I do have to fill the grade book in, okay? And make sure that you're posting in discussions. The discussions are what counts for attendance for the week. So if you have not done any discussions by the end of this week, you're going to be marked absent, okay? So make sure you get this done. And if you have any questions, please send me an email at pjules@uftl.edu. And I wish you the best and have a wonderful week. And God bless you.